Let me ask a follow-up, but with a shorter answer, if you could. You know, if towns, let's just say there isn't much increase in local aid, and towns have to rely more on the property tax, would you favor legislation that would exempt senior citizens from paying the tax override increase? And Carolyn, let me start with you.
What I would do is, I think we're all in this boat together. You know, I think we really need to move ahead together as communities. The reason I ran for this office to begin with was because I wanted to strengthen our communities. But I do feel the pain that our senior citizens on fixed incomes are feeling right now. I would support greater funding for the circuit breaker so that seniors who meet income requirements and who are having a difficult time dealing with property taxes have an out.
Dan?
Well, I agree with that fundamental premise. We are all in this boat together, and one of the real sad consequences of the fact that local aid is inadequately funded is that it tends to pit parents with kids in the schools against senior citizens in Proposition 2.5 overrides all too often. That specific bit of legislation, Sam, that you referred to, I was, again, in the State House when that was first proposed, and it was quite clear from who it was coming from that that was an attempt to take the seniors out of the Proposition 2.5 equation so that the only people going to vote for overrides would be people with children in the schools. I have a 10-month-old daughter. She will be in the Holliston Public Schools as I was. The Holliston Public Schools are very important to me, as are all the public schools in our district. The larger point, though, is still the same. Regardless of the current economic climate, local aid ought to be a true priority of our legislature. And if we're dealing with less dollars, then we ought to be cutting other things, not cutting local aid, not funding to educate our children, not funding to help our seniors you know, keep up with their tax bills or pay their home heating assistance is being drastically underfunded this year. Those are real priorities.
Okay, thank you. And we go to a next question, which Jim will ask, I think, starting with you, Dan.
Okay, Dan. Last year, the State Transportation Finance Commission issued a report that warned that the cost just to maintain state transportation system, roads, bridges, and public transportation would exceed anticipated revenues by 15 to 19 billion over the next 20 years. In the Metro West area, the Mass Turnpike tolls are scheduled to be raised further to pay for turnpike obligations and the big dig costs. What steps would you support to fund the maintenance and repair of the state's transportation system for the state for the short term and the long term? Including the fact that the Massachusetts gas tax of 21 cents per gallon was set in 1991 and is now worth only 14 cents in buying power.
Thank you, Jim, for that question as well, because this is an issue that has been absolutely central to my campaign, and it's been at the top of the headlines for the last couple of weeks. There are a couple of points to be made in response to your question. First, I'll make the broad point that I've been making all along. True priorities of government include public safety, transportation infrastructure, education. Right now, we don't have a lack of money in the system. It's the way we spend our money that is a problem. It's the way we prioritize our spending that is the problem. Now, we're looking at tough times ahead, and the government is not the only entity looking at tough times ahead. Our families are looking at tough times ahead. First and foremost, so I don't run out of time before saying it, I will absolutely fight to support the governor's initiative now to eliminate the Turnpike Authority, but to make sure that that also includes elimination of the tolls. The tolls on the Massachusetts Turnpike are a travesty of inequity right now. Everyone says it. Everyone running for office says toll equity, big issue, very important, furrowed brow, but they don't do anything about it. And as they kick the can down the road, we keep getting hit with toll increases. 2 so far this year. One enacted in January, another massive one proposed a couple of weeks ago. the time for kicking the can down the road is past with the turnpike. The governor recognized it last week. I've been saying it all along. I fought with Governor Romney to try and roll the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority into Mass Highway, and we were rebuffed by the legislature, which very jealously guards its patronage haven, which is the Massachusetts Turnpike. But enough is enough. As to the gas tax question, Jim, I've talked about this with quite a few people, and what I would say is the governor has proposed several major reforms just this week. Again, there are things I've been talking about. They're the things that the Governor Romney talked about. Reforming the way retirement benefits are structured for transportation employees, MBTA, Pike. Right now, the retirement benefits that are paid out to those agencies are exorbitant beyond anything anyone gets in the private sector, and they're extraordinarily costly. You mentioned the Transportation Finance Commission. The single largest savings in the Transportation Finance Commission report would be to stop paying salaries with borrowed money. It's like paying for groceries with a credit card. That will cost us hundreds of millions of dollars over 20 years. I will be a voice to say, until you enact reforms, no, you cannot come back to our wallets. And it doesn't matter if the gas tax is the only tax that hasn't been raised since 1991. Until you enact reforms, you cannot come for our wallets. And I will fight to eliminate the tolls.
Thank you. Carolyn, your views on those two issues?
Jim, I think this is a great question, and I think, looking at the Transportation Finance Commission report, I think that was one of, a badly needed report coming out of government to not just make assumptions about what things are needed to happen to save money and to address funding issues, but to actually give concrete recommendations to do that. And I know a lot of these recommendations have been worked on, including the procurement structure for state bridge projects. And one of the recommendations coming out of that, there were a number of them, one of them being a gas tax, as you suggested, and the real issue that reforms are needed and are recommended, but there's also a need for additional revenues, no matter how many reforms are taken on. And I think, that given the weight of this report, given the fact that it is a bipartisan report, objective report, we can't write any options off the table at this point. I think we need to seriously consider them all, including a gas tax. My concern with Dan's proposal, quite frankly, for eliminating the tolls is that, you can eliminate the tolls all you want, but you still require revenues to pay off the big dig debt. I absolutely agree, as does anyone else who talks about tolls in Metro West, that the current situation is inequitable, and that most of Metro West toll payers are paying for a disproportionate amount of big dig debt. However, that debt does not go away simply by eliminating the tolls. And if you're going to make that proposal, then you need to offer an alternative or a suggested way that we are going to address that funding. And that, all options are on the table as far as I'm concerned. Responsible government has to consider and deliberate as a group. And it's not a unilateral decision that any one representative will make going into the State House. We need to work together, find out a plan that's equitable and that makes sense for the state, not just in the short term to get through our immediate needs, but a long-term plan so that we know that whatever changes we make, we're moving in the right direction that will leave us in a better place down the road.